So hello everyone, many thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Running a Successful Apprenticeship Programme. Today's webinar is going to be delivered by Rachel Roby, who is our Strategic Apprenticeship Lead here at Cogent Skills. Just some housekeeping rules before we start. Lines are on mute and webcams are also turned off. This session is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be available afterwards. There is a chat box in the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions for Rachel as we are going through the presentation, then please fire them through. We also have some time for Q&A at the end of the session where Rachel can address any questions you might have. We'll also pick up any unanswered questions offline as well. There will also be some interactive polls for you to participate in as we're going along. These will just flash up on your screen as we're going through the presentation, and we do encourage active participation in these. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Rachel, who will take you through the presentation. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Kat. Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar this Monday lunchtime and spending your lunchtime with me. I'm Rachel Roby, the Strategic Apprenticeship Lead here at Cogent. And for the next half an hour to 45 minutes, I'll be talking about the role and responsibility within an apprenticeship journey. For those that have attended Cogent Skills webinars before, you'll know that we've done a series of webinars on apprenticeship themes. Starting an apprenticeship programme was one that was delivered just before the summer, and then this is the next in the series around the direct roles and responsibilities. I will just say before we start, this is based on the English funding model of apprenticeships and the English model of delivery of apprenticeships, and I just wanted to make that clear from the beginning. Aims and objectives of the session are to help you understand or secure your understanding on roles and responsibilities and making sure that you're getting the most out of your apprenticeship programmes. During the session, we'll be talking about the journey and the roles and responsibilities of some key players in the life cycle of an apprenticeship, and this will include the employers, providers, endpoint assessment organisations, and then some small information towards the end about some of the regulators that are involved in the process and what their roles and responsibilities are. As Kat explained, we would like this to be an interactive session, so I have included a few polls. So Kate, if you could just start with the first poll, please. And this poll is about who do you think, if any, has the most important role during an apprenticeship programme? We'll just give people 20-30 seconds. Okay, Kate, when you're happy that there's been enough response. Fab. So we mixing the polls. Hope you can see the results out. So we've got 2 that have voted for the employer, 1 that has voted for the provider, no votes for either the regulator or the EPA, and then 9 votes, 75% of all of the above. I would just say that there probably isn't a right or a wrong, but if I was going to go for it, I would have probably done the all as well. There are different levels of responsibility through the journey, but each one as its own point has the most relevance of importance. So thank you for participating in that. So to get going, just to show you a quick visual really on the journey and where the key stakeholder involvement is. So this is just a bit of a visual guide of the journey of an apprenticeship programme. So on the top we have our, and on the left hand side we have our sign up. So when you have contracted with an apprentice and you have initiated and made agreements with a training provider, you will go through a process of initial assessment and onboarding. You will then go into your on-programme stage, which obviously can be a 12-month minimum programme up to a 5-year programme, if that was what the minimum length of stay was. And during that, the individuals that have enrolled onto the apprenticeship will do their in-house learning and development. They will do their on-the-job training, their off-the-job training, and English and maths. And that will be dependent on how long the programme is, and will cover the length of the programme. And you'll see at the bottom the key stakeholders that are involved in all of the processes and all of each stage. Towards the end, you can get to Gateway, and we'll talk more about Gateway later on and what that is and what role that is. Once individuals have gone through Gateway, they then move into the final stage, which is the endpoint assessment, which are the formal assessments that have been developed by the Trailblazer Group and the Institute approved as per the assessment plan that should be published on the Institute's websites. So as we move through, you will see that obviously the apprentice, they start off as a candidate and then they become enrolled. And obviously they're a key stakeholder in this. Our employer responsibilities go all the way through. Our training providers go all the way through. And then our endpoint assessment organisations should be included in the on-programme learning. And again, I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go through the presentation. And then obviously they take over towards the end. But you will also see that the training provider should also stay engaged during endpoint assessment. And again, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about where their role is all the way through. So role and responsibility of the employer. So as employing apprentices is hopefully a key part of your succession planning, your early careers and talent. And it can support you with your growth plans. It can support you as you're moving your way through internally. And they show and give apprentices a real life work experience, as well as having an underpinned and structured programme of learning that should be supported by a training provider. And we've highlighted some key employer responsibilities. Now, this isn't all responsibilities, and obviously those can differ depending on the apprentice, their background, their age. But fundamentally, there are some key responsibilities that you should be considering and making sure that are included. Now, as we start, we have supporting the recruitment process. So making sure that you're employing the right people for your business. Engaging with a selected training provider during the sign-up process and making sure that all parties are committed and fully understand the expectations of what an apprenticeship is going to be. Then provide ongoing support to the apprentice, ensuring that they're giving all the opportunities to learn and develop as part of their apprenticeship programme, supporting all of the off-the-job learning activities, playing an active role and taking part in progress reviews and engaging with the training provider and the apprentice during these reviews, working with the provider to select the appropriate endpoint assessment organisation and take part in any gateway activities to make sure that all parties are happy that competence has been met prior to going through to endpoint assessment. Allowing the training provider to regularly engage with the learners and ensure that they're meeting their requirements of the training plan, and ensuring that the learners are given all opportunities to take part in learning activities. And then supporting the apprentice to gain and develop the evidence that they need. Quite often, endpoint assessments require a portfolio of evidence or working on a project brief, but also just demonstrating evidence that demonstrates that they have been able to put the skills into practice and that they are building evidence that shows that they are developing competency in that role. And I think it's really important that all of those stages, you know, I could probably talk for half an hour just on each of those different bullet points. But what it's about is about, from an employer point of view, is making sure that you are supporting that individual all the way through their journey, that they feel like they have got people to come and talk to inside the business, and they are given all of the opportunities to develop as per what was agreed at the beginning, when the training plan and when plans were developed at the start. Now, understanding that apprentices are real people, you have a business, you have businesses to run. So it's about open communication. It's about being clear with what the learning goals are, working with the provider, and keeping those communication channels open, and addressing any issues as you go if any issues do occur. And then there are also some employer kind of wider responsibilities. Now, internally, obviously, if you're employing an apprentice, you need to make sure that the general HR regulations are being followed, depending on the contract. Are you employing them on an apprenticeship contract or a permanent internal contract? Ensuring that apprentices are getting wellbeing support, making sure that health and safety, risk assessments, personal assessments are also undertaken. And then there's some responsibilities that I would say are specifically linked to the apprenticeship that you need to think about. Some around contractual obligations, and there's just a couple of questions there that don't necessarily need answering right now, but it's things for you to think about internally. So do you have any of your own conditions that you put into contracts? Are you up to date with all of the contracts that you have with different providers? Are you signing one contract? Do you have a contract? Are you just signing the provider's contracts without any of your own conditions? And do you know what you've signed up for, depending on the employer? And then also in terms of financial monitoring, how confident are you that the funding rules that you sign up to as an employer of an apprentice, that they are being followed? Do you know that there are funding rules that you're signing up for and that you have some responsibilities of those? But also, are you confident that the provider is also meeting the funding rules? And then finally, around the progress monitoring. So I'll talk a little bit more about progress reviews in a second, but ensuring that progress throughout the apprenticeship programme is being monitored. And do you have mechanisms in place to make sure that the KSBs of the standard are being delivered and met, that any qualification that is being delivered, again, is on track, and the learners are being prepared for formal assessment or ongoing assessment? Functional skills, so English, maths, are they being delivered if they have functional skills to complete? And then wider personal development. Now, whether that be wellbeing, mental health, budgeting, hope with accommodation, travel if they're moving away, if they're relocating, but wider personal development, are all four in place? And are the checks and balances in place? And do you have people internally that have some responsibility of making sure that an apprentice is progressing through their programme? And that's something for you to think about and maybe have some internal conversations about. Moving on to the role of a provider. So again, similarly to the slide before, depending on the apprenticeship that you are enrolling an apprentice on will depend on the provider that you engage with. Providers can be colleges, universities, independent training providers. They will all have subtle differences, whether it be the way they deliver the programme, their timetabling, how they communicate, but there should be some fundamentals in place. Ultimately, the provider is responsible for delivering the apprenticeship programme with the training plan that has been designed with you at the start, to ensure that the knowledge, skills and behaviours of the standard are being delivered and your learner is developing and becoming competent, and they are responsible for tracking that progress and then making decisions with you at the end as to whether that learner has developed the right amount of competence to be able to go through and be fully assessed through the endpoint assessment organisation and then certificated. Their responsibility does not end until that learner has fully achieved and received their certificate. So we have a few individual things to think about here. So they should be working with you during the onboarding process. So making sure that the learner is being signed up effectively, efficiently, all the checks and balances are in place. So there is a full initial assessment to identify the correct starting points for that learner. If they have any prior experience or prior knowledge, qualifications, units from previous courses or learning things that they have done in the past? And does that then impact the training plan for this apprenticeship? Does it affect the costings? And does it affect the time that the learner should be on the apprenticeship programme? And all of those are things that should be discussed before anybody signs on the dotted line. There should be a training plan, there should be a full costed model made available to you to sign before the apprentice starts any formal learning. They should then develop a structured delivery or training plan. Providers call them different things, but it is basically a breakdown of when elements of the programme will be delivered. Is that being designed against the KSBs of the standard? Is that being delivered against modules or units within qualifications? And then are you being told how those qualifications link to the KSBs of the standards? But either way, a structured learning plan should be developed for the whole of the apprenticeship programme. Now, I would just caveat that a 4-year programme, it's probably quite difficult to design on day one the full script of a 4-year cycle. But what they should be able to do is identify when key modules are being delivered, when key assessments are taking place, and how that learner will go through their apprenticeship programme from month 1 up to gateway, whether that be month 13, month 25, month 48. And they should be able to provide that outlook from before that learner starts. They should be providing some name contacts, ideally a name contact for the employer and also the apprentice. Now, that might not be the same person. You might work with a business development manager or an account manager from a provider point of view, and the apprentice might have their tutor's details. It doesn't matter if those people are different, as long as you're clear in what the roles and responsibilities of those individuals are. You might also need contact details of the provider's finance department so that you can work with them if any additional monies are needed. You might need support from an examinations officer, but at minimum, there should be a named contact for the employer and a named contact for the apprentice. Providers are also responsible and should be planning and supporting apprenticeships with their wider, we talked about it before, functional skills and personal development. Now, what I would say is some providers do outsource some of their functional skills delivery. So it might be through an external party, which are called a subcontractor. But either way, the main provider that you are contracting with is the responsible party to make sure that your learner is on track, is on programme, and is working their way through their training plan. They may outsource, and there may be subcontractors, but the responsibility is with the main provider. They should have effective safeguarding in practices. They should be arranging regular workplace visits and progress reviews, and they should be monitoring and communicating with you the ongoing delivery that the learner is undertaking, and that the learner is able to show what they are learning and how they are putting that learning into practice. And then what I would just say as a little visual is we have a stage through an apprenticeship programme. An apprenticeship should equal substantive new knowledge, skills and behaviours. And to get there, you conduct your initial assessments and diagnostics, which gives you the starting point. You then add in a tailored learning plan that should be individualised to the learner's needs. You then deliver that training plan and you review the learning on an ongoing basis, which may mean having to adjust or retailor. And then hopefully at the end, you then have a learner that we would class, and you as an employer would agree, is occupationally competent. And when you're occupationally competent, you should go through to endpoint assessment, passed with flying colours, and come off the apprenticeship programme as a trained individual at whatever the apprentice has been delivered at. So, quick question for you, and this is where we come into our next poll. Are you confident that your providers are doing this correctly for your learners, and to demonstrate good return on investment from your levy and your funding. Now, I hope, saying all of this, I'm hoping a lot of you will say yes. But you think about it, from what I've just told you in the last 10 minutes, how confident are you that your providers are doing everything they can, and that you're confident that you're getting a good return on investment for your levy and your funding? So Kate, if you can put the next poll up, please. Okay, Kate, when you're happy that there's been enough participation, if you want to show the results. Okay, so a mixed bag. So we've got 23% are fully confident, which is really good to know. We've got another 23% are fully confident, 31% of confident, 46%. So between us, it's quite an even fully confident to confident, around 50%, and then 46% around somewhat confident. Hopefully towards the end of the webinar, and also in any future webinars, hopefully we can do some digging on that somewhat confident. Listen to the rest of the presentation where there's some kind of support on what people should be doing, and almost maybe have a look at that as a bit of a tick list, and maybe use the information that I'm talking through that may help give you a little bit of a steer on some questions that you maybe should think about starting to ask some of those providers to raise that into some more confidence levels. But a bit of a mix, which to be honest I was expecting, but it does show that there's some room for improvement from providers that are delivering to your apprentices if everybody isn't fully confident. So the next part of the presentation is around the apprenticeship journey and some key steps involved. This part shows, so this slide shows all of the 4 stages that we talked about, I mentioned at the beginning with the visual, and it will just show some bullet points of some key aspects of each of the stages, and what people should be doing. So we've got our sign up and induction, where we should be confirming eligibility, the costs, and the funding attached. We should be creating a training plan using the starting points to identify exactly what the learner needs to learn. Then we have an induction. So all apprentices should be inducted by their training provider, as well as by yourself through your normal HR practices, to ensure that they fully understand all of the programme requirements. So that should talk them through how they're going to work through the learning objectives, how they're going to develop competencies against the knowledge, skills and behaviours, how they're going to be assessed, whether that's through a formal qualification or ongoing assessments. If they have functional skills, it should also be giving them some information on what the functional skills and how that programme of delivery would work. And then also should be, from induction, talking about what that endpoint assessment is. And then once everybody's happy, once everybody fully knows their requirements, their obligations, all parties should then be confident that they will sign, and there are formal apprenticeship agreements and commitment statements. There is a binding document that must be signed before the learning gets fully underway. There has been some flexibilities in this year's funding rules that parties can have up to 42 days to sign this paperwork. But what I would say is make sure that you have sight of the training plan, that you are comfortable with what is being expected before you do sign that. And the earlier the better, because what you don't want is to get a learner enrolled, starting on programme before you've seen sight of that, and then you're not happy with what is put in front of you, and there could be some issues with signing it or what is agreed. We then move on to our on-programme learning, where the apprentice is undertaking their study of learning. Training providers will carry out visits and carry out assessments, and conduct reviews. Apprentices should be allocated independent study time, especially if they have assignments to work on or if they're preparing for exams. You as an employer should also be fully involved in workplace training for their on-the-job learning and any support for functional skills that is needed. Towards the end, we then go to Gateway. Gateway is when all of the learning hours and all of the training plan has been delivered and there is a decision to make as to whether the learner is competent to go through to Gateway and to be independently assessed. Now, there are some compliance checks that need to be done. Has all of the hours been delivered? Have we met our 20% off the job requirements? Has the learner completed all of their exams to make sure that they can go through to Gateway if there is exams in their programme? Once all of that has been done, there should be a discussion and all parties should agree before going through to Gateway. And then once the Gateway has opened, that is when the endpoint assessment takes place and where the learner and the endpoint assessment organisation with yourself as employers would embark on the assessment plan and how many different assessments there are needed. And the learner would go through a series of assessments and then they would be graded and certificated towards the end. And then through the next few slides, what I've done, and I won't read out word for word, but I'll keep these on each slide for a few minutes. We then have a mix of roles and responsibilities. And what I've tried to highlight is some key provider responsibilities and then where employers have the responsibilities as well. So it's really important that it is an ongoing discussion between all parties, especially during the sign up. Need to make sure that the right starting point has been indicated, and that is through facilitating the initial assessments and from an employer, you supporting them. You then need to make sure that all of the eligibility checks have been done. Has the learner been in the UK for the right amount of time? Are they eligible for funding? And a reason why they might not be eligible for funding is that they've already done maybe a previous course that means that they are too knowledgeable or maybe too competent to meet the 12-month minimum requirement. So that's where the initial assessments are really important, because from a provider point of view, they need to be confident that there is 12 months minimum worth of learning for a learner to become fully occupationally competent. Once all that is done, what I would say from an employer point of view is it's scrutinising contracts, it's making sure that you're happy with what has been agreed, it's ensuring that all parties, including the apprentice, understands. So especially if there's going to be travel away from home, if there's going to be overnights, if it's going to be a bit of a, if it's going to be a blended learning experience, which lots of apprenticeships do have some online delivery or maybe some block release delivery. That means that the apprentice has to work away or go away for learning, and making sure that you as a business and also the apprentice are comfortable with that before you agree. Moving on to our on-programme responsibilities. Like I've said a couple of times, ultimately the provider has that responsibility to make sure that the training plan is followed through, that they carry out workplace assessments, that they're carrying out 12-week reviews, that they're meeting all of their contractual service level agreements that you might have put in place during your apprenticeship agreement contract signing, and that they're communicating effectively with all parties. And one thing at the bottom that I've put around the provider is that they are leading the discussions and supporting employers around the selection of the endpoint assessment organisation. Funding rules. So in terms of selecting endpoint assessment organisations, what it's really important to do is that this is done early. Funding rules have changed over the last few years to bring endpoint assessment selection. It has to be in place at least 6 months before the end of a programme. What I would recommend, and from lots of previous experience, is that endpoint assessment organisations are assigned very early into the programme. And the reason I say that is because every endpoint assessment organisation can be slightly different in how they work with employers, the support materials that they might have available to you, the amount of mock assessments that might be available, but also how much engagement they may undertake with apprentices during the programme. And the sooner you pick the endpoint assessment organisation, the sooner you can embark on all of that knowledge. So whether they give you access to a system where the apprentice and yourself as the employer could download materials, could download support guides, or if you know that there might be maybe an annual webinar or session that is supporting you, supporting the apprentice, or might be apprentice specific. But either way, the earlier the endpoint assessment is spoke about and sorted, the more confident all parties can feel that EPA will be approached properly. And then in terms of employer, and the responsibility of an employer in this is to make sure that you are helping your apprentice meet the training plan requirements. So attending the sessions, making sure that time is given for independent study, if they have assignment deadlines, making sure that you are facilitating the on-the-job activities as well as their off-the-job, and making sure that you're engaging with the training provider. And what I would say, I put a star by it, attending and participating in a workplace review is really, really key. Workplace reviews are every 12 weeks maximum, and it's an opportunity for you as the employer, the apprentice and the training provider to come together and review the previous 12 weeks and plan the next quarter. Reflect on what's gone well, what progress has an apprentice made, a simple question, what do you know now that you didn't 3 months ago? What can you do now that you couldn't do 3 months ago? Is a really easy question to get a conversation going. But also then learning if there's anything that hasn't gone well, and can you as an employer jump in and support? Can you put some extra work in place? Can you support some additional workplace mentoring, shadowing that could help a learner, but then also actively planning for the next quarter, seeing what the learner is going to be learning in the formal learning environment, what modules are they working towards, which KSBs are they working towards, and then what can you do internally to make sure that those KSBs are being contextualized, that you're helping them understand what they're learning, and that they can start to apply what they're learning and develop their skills. In terms of Gateway, so mentioned before, Gateway is the kind of the discussion that shows whether a learner has met competence and can go through to formal assessment. All the provider responsibilities is making sure that all the Gateway requirements have been met. Gateway requirements are set out very clearly in the assessment plans, which attach to every occupational standard that an apprenticeship is then written on. And there is a list, and they're getting easier because a lot of assessment plans are now becoming templated, that it should be a list of everything that a learner needs to meet. Fundamentally, they have to have met, they have to have gone through all of the training plan, they have to be able to demonstrate that all the off-the-job hours, so the minimum 20% hours, have been met, that they have gathered evidence to show that the KSBs have been delivered, that the skills have been assessed, that any qualifications have been certificated, and that all evidence requirements are ready to be uploaded onto a portal that the endpoint assessment organisation might run, or be sent to them, so that the endpoint assessment organisation can do their checks and can start the planning and diarising of when the tests will happen. So all of those checks are the provider's responsibility. In terms of employers, it's really important that you're confident and you've done everything that you need to do internally to make sure that you also believe that the learner has demonstrated enough competence and that they are competent to go through assessment. And it should be a joint conversation, ideally a three-way conversation with the apprentice, also maybe ready to answer some questions, participate in a mock assessment that you might do or the provider might do, but that all communication channels are open. It's also really important that from a learner's point of view, that they are confident with what is going to happen during the endpoint assessment. So you know exactly what the roles and responsibilities of the EPAO is. Do they come in and do the assessments? Is it going to take place online? How long is it going to be? And making sure that the learner feels comfortable with all of those things in place. And then the final stage is actually the endpoint assessment. So as I mentioned at the beginning, it is a formal assessment that can be various different activities that happen. It could be an observation, it could be a project, it could be a test that might be done online, or it might be an exam-based written exam, but it will be stipulated in the assessment plan which assessments the learner will undertake. And during that, we have some key roles and responsibilities. In terms of provider, it's important that the providers are keeping in touch and just making sure that the process, the endpoint assessment is happening, that the stages are working through. And then towards the end, and assuming that the learner achieves, that certification arrangements are in place so that the learner can be certificated and celebrated when the certificates come through. And then from an employer point of view, it's around supporting the planning with efficient timescales and then facilitating it. Now, the facilitating could be, arranging for you to host. Especially if there's a workplace assessment, if it's an observation, making sure that, as an example, if you have health and safety or risk assessment protocols, making sure that the endpoint assessment organisation knows what they need to do. Do they need to have an induction before they come onto site, and how can that be done? Booking a room for them and making sure that they've got somewhere that they can carry out the interview with the learners during the assessment. But basically being that support hand for the learner, no matter how competent they feel, there will always be an element of nerves around EPA, and it's about you being that support mechanism as an employer to make sure that the process stays through. If hopefully not, but if there is an element where a learner does not pass first time, there will be a discussion that takes place between the endpoint assessment organisation and the learner stroke employer as to whether a resit can happen or whether the learner may need some more learning. And that's where a provider would come back in and support maybe some upskilling or some reskilling, or deliver something else before the learner can go back into Gateway. And in that regard, again, the conversation should be a four-way conversation about who takes responsibility for that additional learning, and then goes back through and is reassessed. So the final stage around endpoint assessment and the endpoint assessment's roles and responsibilities. So the role of the endpoint assessment organisation is to facilitate and assess the individual. What they should be doing and what they are getting, I hope you would agree, better at is communicating through the stages. As I said at the beginning, they should be engaging during the on programme. It shouldn't just be that an EPA becomes involved in the apprenticeship journey at Gateway. There should be on programme check-ins to make sure that the learner's on track. Pre-planning of the assessments can take place, which is really good that they're pre-planning, especially during busy times, and making sure that they're working with the employer to make sure that they can get on sites, but also that the learner is staying on track, and that they are going through all the practical applications, so approving and rejecting, planning the activities, and then carrying them out. Once they carry the assessments out, they should then, and this should be something that is agreed as part of the contract that you sign with them, that there is clear dates, clear timescales of how long it should be to get results, timescales on when paperwork will be processed and when certificates will be released, and then also confirmation of who will receive the certificates and how they'll get to the learner, and whether that goes to the provider or whether that comes through to you. But ultimately, they are responsible for facilitating, assessing, quality assuring, and then producing the results of whether a learner has met their occupational competency and can achieve and be certificated for their apprenticeship programme. So a little bit on the regulators. So you may have heard of these, you may know and be confident of what these people all do, but there are various different agencies that are involved in the apprenticeship programme. And I'll just touch on them just really quickly. In terms of Ofqual, Ofqual are the regulators. You may have heard of Ofqual more when it comes to GCSE and A-level results, but they are the regulators of qualifications. And over the last couple of years, they have become the regulator of endpoint assessment organisations, and endpoint assessment organisations all now have to be Ofqual regulated to be able to deliver apprenticeship standards, and that is to raise the quality of endpoint assessment. Ofsted, you again may have heard of them. Hopefully you have, and probably more likely with schools and colleges, but Ofsted are responsible for the quality of all provision for apprenticeships now, including degree level apprenticeships. They do have a framework. It's called the Education Inspection Framework, better known as the EIF, and they work and they go out and inspect anybody that has a contract to deliver apprenticeships. And yes, they are responsible for ensuring that the quality of education, safeguarding, leadership and management and personal development of apprentices, obviously that quality is high, and there are full grading criteria that go along that. The Office for the Office for Students is a non-departmental public body that are linked with the Department of Education. They are a regulator of higher education establishments, predominantly universities, and they also have inspection powers and quality kite mark powers of HEI, so higher education, and they will be applicable for those learners that are on level 6 and level 7 programmes, or level 5 that have links with universities. So you may, as an employer, the Office for Students also have inspection powers. They also have regulatory powers. So they will have a register, and they are responsible for ensuring that the delivery within a university is to a high quality and that their students are being supported. So you may find, if you've ever been asked as an employer to take part in an Ofsted inspection where you're asked to give feedback, if any of your apprentices are on degree apprenticeships, then there may also be times where the Office for Students may survey you, may ask to speak to you, and that's all part of their quality stamp for institutions that deliver level 6 and 7 degree apprenticeships. The Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, better known as IFATE, they are an independent body who approve apprenticeships and technical education. They are also responsible for T-levels. They write and underpin the standards. So when Trailblazers design apprenticeships, they sit on the Institute's website and they work with employers and stakeholders and providers to make sure that apprenticeships remain up to date, and that they also deliver and design T-level qualifications alongside higher technical qualifications, which are level 4 and 5 qualifications, better known as HTQs. And then the final regulator in this part is the ESFA, the Education and Skills Funding Agency, and they basically manage the money. So when you pay your levy or when you draw down apprenticeship funding, it will come back from ESFA. Final poll, and I'm conscious of time. That is the end of the presentation in terms of the roles and responsibilities. I hope you found it useful, but one thing that I would love to ask is what would help you feel more confident, because this would help me know what future webinars I can design or deliver, but also any future guidance that you may need support with. So I'd be really grateful, Kate, if you could just pull up that last poll. Is there anything, or I'm hoping I haven't confused you all too much today, But is there anything specifically that you think that you would like any more advice and guidance on, you would like some similar webinars delivered on, or anything that you think would help you feel more confident with this apprenticeship process? And Kate, when you're happy with the response, if you want to pull up the results. Fab. So understanding more about progress reviews has got 33%, along with in the manager and mentor role. Okay. Funding rules and regulator roles. Fab. So there's my tick list then. So understanding manager and mentor roles more, and progress reviews. It's really, really helpful just for me to understand what would be useful for you, and I can feed that into my future planning. So that brings the presentation to an end. Thank you so much for listening. I'm hoping that you've all stayed, and I'll hand back to Kat.
Just to remind everyone, if you do have any questions for Rachel, then there's still time to fire them across. Just a couple of questions have come through, Rachel.
Okay.
Someone wants to know what they should do if they don't think their provider is giving their apprentices the right service. Okay,
so I think in terms of first steps, think about what you think you aren't happy with. What key parts don't you think you're getting the service? And then I would suggest arranging a meeting with the account manager, or the contact that you should have. It might not be the assessor of the apprentice. It might need to go higher, but it's about outlining exactly what your concerns would be, agreeing some actions, and I think it's really important to agree a time scale on those actions, and then monitoring them. And then if you're still not happy, raising it up the ladder, and whether or not if it's an operational, so if you don't feel like your apprentice is getting time, if you feel the training plan isn't working, or if you feel like the quality isn't good enough, might help the provider know where to point your query to, because they will have compliance teams, but they'll also have quality teams that might be able to help.
Perfect, thanks for that. Also, someone wants to know, is the employer still allowed to select the endpoint assessment organisation, as they've heard those rules were changing?
Yes, no, really good question. So for anybody that attended the webinar in the summer that I did on funding, we hadn't had clarification, but yes, the funding rules have changed. And the funding rules as of the 1st of August were that the provider now has more control on selecting the endpoint assessment organisation. So it now says that a provider should select it. I would really stand my ground if you already have established relationships with endpoint assessment organisations. If you have a good relationship with one, if you've put learners through, and you're adamant that you want to keep them, then please make sure that is raised to your apprenticeship provider. There is now a growing trend, and there's more endpoint assessment organisations out there, so it's really worth doing your own homework, but being asked to be presented with options rather than being forced to select a specific EPAO until you know the full picture.
Perfect, thanks very much for that, Rachel. Okay, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending and for taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen. And thanks, Rachel, for your insight on apprenticeships as well. Cheers, everybody. Bye. Have a nice afternoon.